This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
How much now? What's the address to your emergency?
Hey, I'm at 1051 Wyatt Road in Burlington, 27217.
Yes, ma'am.
The neighbors are shooting and the bullets are like hitting over here in our trailer.
So what lot number?
The neighbors on lot number 27 that are shooting, and it's two guys.
Okay. Alright, so lot 27 shooting and they hit your trailer?
It kind of hit the window of one of our rooms. They're not shooting towards us, but wherever they're shooting, like I guess like part of the bullet thing is hitting over here though.
Alright, what's your name? Hello?
Hello, I want to be an unknown caller.
Okay, that's fine. Did you see anybody? Hello?
No, I'm inside, but I don't know if somebody else.
But
I don't know if somebody else
did the
with me.
bullet listen to me, did the bullet hit your house?
No, sir.
Huh? It's 911. What's the location of your emergency?
Yes, I'm calling because I just heard a bunch of gunshots outside my house.
Where you at?
1051 White Road.
1051 White Road?
Yes, ma'am. And I mean a lot of gunshots.
Okay, it looks like somebody else is already calling this in, okay?
All right, thanks.
All right, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right.
911, location of your emergency. Hey, it's going to be on 1051 Wyatt Road. 105. Shots fired. All right. Have you heard anything? Yeah, they keep going off. Okay. Do you hear any people outside or anything? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Hold on. Do you I'm sorry. hear outside? I'm not sure. I just hear it. It sounds like it's next door. Okay. All right. Well, we've got several calls, and we're going to go ahead and get some help on the way, okay? Okay. All right, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hey, this is 911. We got a phone call from this number. Do you have an emergency?
We feel shooting.
Okay, are they still, so they're still shooting?
No.
I'm sorry?
No. We just here in like a few minutes ago.
Okay. What lot are you at?
We on the, we have kids and we just there.
Okay, I understand. We do have deputies on the way out there, okay? Would you like to speak to a deputy?
No, it's fine.
Okay, all right. Well, they are on the way to check the area, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alamance 911, what's the location of your emergency? Hello?
Hello.
Hi, this is 911. Do you have an emergency?
Yes, I do.
Okay, what's the address?
Okay, it's 1051 Wyatt Road. Yeah.
Okay, what's the phone number that you're calling from? Okay, and tell me exactly what happened.
Okay, I was just outside on my back porch no more than maybe 6 minutes ago. I tried to call you 2 other times, but it couldn't go through. I don't know why. There's our TT call.
Okay.
Okay, but there was just a drive-by down here. I didn't see the vehicle. I heard a vehicle coming through, sounded maybe like a big truck or something like that. And they just opened fire, like kind of catty-cornered, from my trailer. So I jumped in the house, in the trailer, and got on the floor. And they sped off. They were still shooting. I don't know exactly what trailer they were shooting at.
Okay.
And then I guess somebody else had come out and started shooting back. And then I just heard a vehicle in the trailer park drive off.
You just heard someone drive off, like an additional vehicle besides that truck?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you know what kind of vehicle that was?
No, I don't, because I didn't even look. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what trailer they were shooting at, because I was on the back porch.
Okay.
And I heard a truck. I heard a vehicle, sounded like a big truck. You know.
Okay.
You know.
But you didn't see anything?
I didn't see anything. I just heard that they just opened fire and started shooting.
Okay. All right. We do have a deputy that's arriving on scene right now. We got several calls about this. Would you like to speak to someone?
Well, no, not really. I'm just scared.
Okay.
Like, I don't. Should I stay in the floor when they're gone? I don't. Oh my God.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a lot of help on the way. Okay. So if you get any more information, or if you think of anything, just call us back immediately. Okay.
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 Oh, the police is here. I'll go.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, my back. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
So this is unrelated. This is True Crime Excess Unrelated, which means it's not necessarily something that's related to the main missing persons cases. We're looking for something of season 2 in the current instance, where we're out in Colorado looking at a lot of missing persons cases there. And there are unrelated things along the way, even in the main podcast. But this is specifically about some topics that we've started to research, both of us, surrounding drug trafficking. And so this started because a friend of yours from high school was killed in what was described as a shootout with a Mexican cartel. And it's interesting, like the things you think you know until that you start looking and you realize you really don't know what's going on there.
Right. I can honestly say I didn't know anything about any of that.
Right. And so we started looking at the sheriff's statements in that case, and we had a lot of questions. And the truth was, the way that was all presented came so fast and so furious, it felt pretty irresponsible overall. But it also, like, when I say irresponsible, I mean, I felt like they were endangering loved ones.
Right.
Does that make sense?
And keep in mind, like, he wasn't just having a conversation with people. He gave a press conference.
Right. And
in
he
his
gave
official capacity as sheriff of the county. Right.
Yeah. And so once he did that, this story, even it was like kind of happening as we were recording and releasing our own episode, it went viral and it showed up everywhere, and it's not been corrected in any major way. And one of the things that sort of bothered me about the way that the police presented this case was it showed a pretty serious disparity between law enforcement and understanding their adversaries. In this instance, we were able to talk to some people close to this and just get some understanding of what might have been going on, where you and I both feel comfortable going down this road of let's dissect what happened and see what it would look like if the cartel were actually active in the United States. So the sheriff sort of hinted that it was the Sinaloa cartel, and then it came out that it was the Jalisco New Generation cartel. And those people used to be known as the Los Matazetas. This is a semi-militarized group, meaning they operate in a similar manner to a police force or an army, a military. They use highly sophisticated distribution routes, guns, and methods to bring a lot of drugs into the United States. One of the big things that we started to look at is the cartel is, one, not a single organization. It's multiple organizations, but there's typically one that is sort of the head of what is going on currently. And then there's a lot of sort of infighting between organized crime groups. And that's what these are. These are organized crime groups. Primarily, they're coming out of Central America and Mexico. One of the things I noticed right away is that law enforcement as a whole does not seem to understand how the cartel operates, even though it's pretty plainly available to see. You can look at the southern border of the United States and see a very distinct line in methods and modus operandi for these people. Here's what I mean there. On the other side of the border, in multiple cities where the cartel operates sort of in plain sight against the government, it is incredibly violent. And if you look at the history of the different things that they do to send messages and to clean up situations, it looks like an ongoing 30-year war has been happening down there. In fact, each individual incident is like, sometimes they're referenced as massacres, but there are some ridiculous amounts of misinformation that carry across the border into the U.S. because we don't see that type of violence here. In listening to different people talk about the case of Barney Harris and listening to different law enforcement descriptions of operations that have gone on in the United States, specifically with the Department of Justice sort of spearheading state, local, and federal resources to bring about masses of arrests, in addition to listening to the characterization of the other victim in the shooting as a cartel member or a drug runner for the cartel, generally speaking, what we came across is that the cartel itself does not operate in the United States.
That's correct. I actually was trying to figure out the best way to present this. And so what I would say is this. If you take a look at mainstream media sources and the stories that are covered about anything related to any cartel, because I think what's most commonly referenced is the different Mexican cartels, but there are cartels in probably every country, everywhere. But specifically in this situation, we were dealing with, I believe they said, did he say Mexican cartel?
They said a Mexican cartel, and it was they referenced Sinaloa and Jalisco in the press releases.
Okay, and so this is what I encourage people to do. When you come across a headline, now it wouldn't have worked in this particular story that we're talking about, but take a look at the wording of what's being said, because it's really important, and there's a big distinction. I don't want to say like I have no interest in the drug industry. I really don't, except, the impact that it perhaps could have on innocent lives. That would bother me, but I have no idea how it works. And so obviously, because this happened, I started looking, and there's a line that I feel confident in saying, while there may be people operating in the United States with ties back to different cartels, including all of the different Central American cartels. The cartel does not operate in the United States. Once the drugs have crossed the border, into the United States, somebody has paid the cartel for the drugs. They are pretty strict operating procedures. The reason there's so much violence is because of ripoffs and because of the sort of need for vigilante justice to counteract the lawlessness involved, because drug dealers can't very well call the cops when they get ripped off, except apparently in the case that we talked about with Barney, because Barney's brother-in-law is being charged with robbing. In that case, apparently, that's a different story though. This particular...
That case became cop related because there was a shootout.
Yeah, but they charged him with robbing the cartel.
I understand that, which is something that comes up a little later in the episode. We delve into, I'll say, fictional crimes is what they are, and I don't want to jump into that right away. I want to set it up a little bit. But,
well, I was just going to say, just pay attention to what's being said. If it says that somebody has ties to or with connections to, what's being said there is at some point in time before the drugs crossed into the United States, they were purchased by someone in the United States from the cartel. Okay.
Right.
And while I'm sure the people who take on that risk are irritated when their stuff gets stolen, they don't have the force of the cartel behind them, I don't think. And this is just an observation I've made. Because I think what I said to you was, if the Sinaloa cartel was operating here, I wouldn't be able to say they're not and it be questioned. Because if a real cartel was operating here, we would all know it.
Right. There would be evidence of it it would make the headlines quite a bit. It would basically make certain areas where they were operating would seem like an ongoing war zone.
Right, and that's exactly what happens. And there has been, now in Juarez, Mexico, there's been debates sort of going on that it was a terrible place for quite a while, cleaned up its act. And there's actually some backlash about a movie that portrayed Juarez in a way that made it look like a drug war zone. And the people of Juarez said, that's not fair. It was just like that for a little while. Well, then it turned around and then there's more stuff happening there. And we're talking about people, their heads cut off, hung off of bridges, out and out gun battles with the National Guard or...
the federales, the military.
And so the reason I'm saying the cartel's not here is because the cartel doesn't just switch gears because they're here. And while there may be connections or ties, it's not the same thing, because ultimately cartel only comes after people who have stolen money or drugs from them. The risk shifts to whomever is fronting the buy here in the United States once they're being distributed here. Because think about it. The drug cartel of Mexico, whichever one you want to pick, they're not going to risk the millions of dollars that it would take to get these drugs over the border just to have them seized. That's somebody else's risk. And I'm sure there's people willing to take it because we have drugs everywhere.
Right. And so obviously it's getting in. And so that begs a couple of questions. One, which you sort of just touched on, is, if someone says, oh, it's from the cartel, who is the cartel? And depending on when that question is asked and where that question is asked, it can mean different things. In general, it's become sort of a racial stereotype that it's anyone from South or Central America who appears to be distributing or participating in the distribution of any number of illegal narcotics. That's how some law enforcement agencies have begun to present it. And that brings up a number of questions. If the cartel doesn't really operate here, does that mean that people are not in danger should they engage in activities related to basically ripping off criminals? And, that's the answer is that's a mixed bag. And depending on who you are and what you've done, you don't know until you do it.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to interject here. The answer to that is no, do not do that. Do not engage in that kind of thing.
Wait, is that... Well, no, it's funny that you say that because, okay, this is where I'm going with this. In my mind, it's a pretty terrible idea to think about ripping off a cartel, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
sure.
I personally, I would never try and get involved in this level of criminal element that would have to be going on here. But, a lot of conversations have been had sort of politically about what's going on at our border. And right now, if you look at Texas, for instance, federal law enforcement officers have started focusing in on stash houses for drugs and people. It used to be they would be looking for money and like large amounts of drugs that are kept in sort of a secluded location. But more recently, they have started to bring people over the same way. And they're sort of stashing people the same way. Our federal government has sort of used this model of how drugs get into places, stored in places, and how the same with people. And they have started to build their own sting operations out of the illusion of the Mexican cartel. And if that sounds like something out of the movies, it's because you probably have seen it in movies before. We were recently talking about Triple Frontier, but that takes place out of the country. It just involves former U.S. soldiers going to rob what they think is a cartel member's home of a lot of money. We came across a case while we were researching this that sort of made us go further down this road. This case is out of Wilmington, North Carolina, so not very far from where the shootout between Barney Del Harris and others took place so this would be about 2.5 hours east of there. That took place in the dead center of the state in Alamance County, North Carolina. This is the ATF that we're about to talk about, and that stands for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Beginning in December of 2016, continuing through August of 2017, the ATF used a confidential informant and then undercover agents and a wired undercover apartment to investigate gang and drug activity in the Wilmington, North Carolina area. Victor Dorm was the principal target of this investigation. He was thought to be a leader of a subset of the Blood Street Gang. There are a wide variety of gangs, and in the U.S., they operate very similarly to what we think of as cartels. Somewhere, there's essentially a head of a snake, but underneath that head, there are lots of people who are sort of underlings that are making the operation, organized crime, work. So a confidential informant, along with undercover agents, made dozens of purchases of cocaine, heroin, and firearms, and, weirdly enough, counterfeit currency from Victor Dorm, and his gang. It was learned by the ATF that Dorm and his gang were conducting violent robberies. So the feds, they hatched this plan to catch them in the act. Victor Dorm was told by an inside man he and his crew could have the opportunity to rob a cocaine stash house. What Dorm was told was that a Mexican drug cartel was operating a stash house where 2 armed men were guarding 8 to 10 kilograms of cocaine. So Dorm and a couple of his buddies, including a man named Joseph Anthony Vaught from Wilmington, they get together and they make a plan to get ready to commit this robbery. In August of 2017, the heist starts to get put into motion with the plans being finalized. The crew drives to the location to meet with undercover ATF agents who are the people who supposedly have access to this, quote, stash house. What this stash house is a wired apartment of the ATF. So Vaught and Dorm show up, and another gentleman who is unfortunate to be drugged into this level of insanity, named Hooper. So we've got Dorm, we've got Vaught, and we've got Hooper. They think there's 5 other people that are involved in this case. They're going to follow these undercover agents to this separate location where they believe that the agents are going to get them additional cocaine that was supposed to be delivered to the stash house. But at that point, a team of federal agents executes a takedown. They arrest the men. They seize their firearms. This is the federal government faking a Mexican cartel stash house. This is the ultimate drug trafficking version of To Catch a Predator. But there is no Chris Hansen to say, would you have a seat over there?
Yeah, this is odd. And I actually just realized, I was like, why is the ATF doing this? I guess when I was reading it, it didn't register, but it's because of the guns, right?
Guns, yeah, the guns.
Yeah, okay. Because I'm like, where's the DEA?
Exactly.
But yeah, so basically there was no Mexican drug cartel stash house. And they enticed that over these, and I'm not gonna, I mean, they weren't innocent people, but like, what are they doing?
They're getting inventive. The question is it legal?
I don't know that that's the question for us, though. I would say that's the question for the court system, and I think the court system at least partially answered it when they sentenced all of them to jail.
Yeah, these people are all spending a very long time in federal prison.
Right. I am shocked. I don't feel like that setup I think it was a little bit pointless because the agents talked some people into doing something they probably never would have thought of doing if, because they didn't have access to a Mexican drug cartel stash house because
their
nobody does.
There was that they heard these guys were already out committing violent robberies on other people and other gangs, so they were sort of.
Well, they can go catch them doing one of those things.
Well, they decided that I think they might be justified in the fact that they were legitimately trying to stop some violence from happening. But I do think they went about it in a way that is ultimately entrapment.
I don't see how it's not, but I haven't delved real hard into that.
Into the legal side of it. Well, they pled out to all sorts of shit.
But was that the thought to begin with?
Yeah, most of our current day and age, most of the hopes of prosecutors is that criminals will plead out. So the idea is to catch them doing something in the realm of what you need them to plead out to.
I just don't think that the agent should be the one making things up for them to be doing.
Right. I totally agree with that. And I don't know how it's so. If you've ever watched To Catch a Predator, I don't support any of those people.
I'm pretty sure that got shut down because it had really bad consequences.
It got shut down after someone killed themselves. Right.
Yeah.
And there was another round of it that was sort of lining up for Chris Hansen to sort of chase that rabbit again. The thing about that show is it is to some degree it's catching people who genuinely might need to be caught, but you can't tell the difference between that and people who just are sort of sucked up into a thing when it comes to drugs. When it's child exploitation, that's a little more specific, and they've called that entrapment at this point. Like they have said that baiting them into those situations is entrapment.
And it is, and then when it's when it's a 45-year-old man sitting on the other side of the computer, like not a 13-year-old girl or whatever, like have they really committed the crime? Now, I am not on the side of the predators here. Okay, the people who prey upon teenage kids, it does need to be stopped. And if it's a Chris Hansen type thing, now I didn't, it stinks that someone killed themselves, but I don't necessarily know that the show was responsible for that. But, he was sitting them down and saying, why are you doing this? And then they would go off to jail, I imagine.
Well, there are certain tactics that, okay, we have freedom of the press in the United States. There are certain tactics that aggressive journalists get away with, and they get away with using sources confidentially and protecting them, and other things that don't apply to law enforcement necessarily. And the reason is there's a process in place. Okay, the process that is in place to protect defendants it's not to protect child molesters or rapists or murderers or traffickers. It's to protect anyone who's accused of a thing. So
anything.
And the thing about being accused of a thing is sometimes people who are accused of a thing didn't do the thing. And if you've got a system entirely set up on plea bargaining, that means that your system is skewed because a lot of the people taking pleas didn't do the thing.
Right, which I would argue that somebody who talked to one of the undercover people posing as a teenage girl who's actually a 45-year-old man, I would argue they didn't actually do the thing because they were talking with a 45-year-old man who was posing as a teenager.
Right.
I mean, that's a whole different thing.
Various appellate courts have ruled that is exactly the case. And, so like on the one hand, you're using the journalism side of it to expose what is a pretty dark and disturbing thing, but it's just that you're going about it in a manner that is illegal. That's the bottom line. It becomes illegal.
It's illegal from the standpoint of prosecution. It doesn't mean it's illegal for Chris Hansen to do it.
Correct. It's just so Chris Hansen and Perverted Justice, they can do it all day long. That's the organization that was skilled at, sort of ferreting out online predators. They can do it all day long. The problem comes in is when the police do it. And in this instance, it's not Chris Hansen. It's not Perverted Justice. This is the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms, which is, I don't know if they're bored over there or what. I do understand the inkling to want to get violent criminals off the street. And I was trying to find if they had ever done anything like this again. Like from the perspective of, is there an ongoing operation, which is why you don't read a lot about these particular types of operations, where they use this as a way to put purported or alleged gang members that they believe are committing violent felonies in prison. And if so, is that okay? What do you think?
Well, no, that's not okay. I mean, it's not okay for them to be committing violent crimes to begin with, but it's also not okay because that becomes a judgment call for somebody other than who our justice system is designed to be the judgment caller, which would be a judge. And so when you've got law enforcement treading a line of, I'm going to dangle this carrot in front of you, and when you grab it, I'm going to put you in jail. If the carrot hadn't have been there, none of that would have happened. I understand the concept of wanting to put violent offenders away. I understand wanting to get people off the street or whatever. Catch them actually committing a crime or planning an actual crime. Don't set them up for it.
And that is one of the main topics that I had wanted to touch on this week. I'm just curious how many people have heard of the Herald Square bomber. And I'm gonna play some audio here about the Herald Square bomber.
This article is from the April 18th, 2021 issue of the magazine and was written by Rosina Ali, read by Sanila Nankani. Shahavar Mateen Siraj first met the older man late in the summer of 2003. He would see him at the mosque in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, sobbing loudly during prayers and hovering near the imam. But when the man entered the bookstore nearby, where Siraj worked, he was warm and easygoing. He said his name was Osama El-Davoudi, and the two men struck up an unlikely friendship. Siraj, at 21, had a hulking build and a tendency to ramble when he spoke. He usually lingered around the store with friends from the neighborhood, talking about Islam and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had difficulty grasping new ideas and would need them explained multiple times, but in front of his friends, he pretended to know more than he did. El-Davoudi was the son of an Egyptian religious scholar and said he studied nuclear engineering. He was knowledgeable about the world and had a flair about him, gesticulating excitedly as he spoke. To Siraj's delight, El-Davoudi took an interest in him, encouraging him to pursue his interest in computers. Never before had someone this sophisticated, an adult more than twice his age, taken him so seriously. Siraj's family fled Pakistan several years earlier, seeking to escape the violence against their Shiite minority sect. He was a teenager when they arrived in the United States, but he did not attend high school and was still struggling to earn his equivalency diploma. His world consisted of a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens that he shared with his parents and sister, and the equally cramped emporium filled with Islamic books and phone cards that was a 90-minute subway ride away in Bay Ridge. Siraj was quietly pleased when El-Davoudi started offering him rides after work. The young man listened as his friend counseled him on personal responsibility and the Prophet's sayings. Over the months, Siraj found himself pouring his heart out to El-Davoudi about his financial woes and about Mano, the woman in Pakistan he had met online. He hoped to marry her soon. He was distraught when El-Davoudi confided that he was suffering from a liver disease and worried that it was potentially fatal. Siraj promised to care for El-Davoudi's daughter if anything happened to him, and began telling him in his broken English, "I am like your son." Slowly, their conversations took on a darker edge. El-Davoudi complained to Siraj that the FBI was harassing him, maybe because he was a Muslim who knew about nuclear engineering. They discussed the Abu Ghraib prison scandal and online images of Muslims being tortured and killed in the wars overseas. When Siraj saw a picture of a girl who was raped, he broke down and cried. El-Davoudi seemed to share his friend's anger. Something had to be done. Something that would get the world to pay attention. They agreed that an attack that would hurt the United States economically would help save Muslim lives. But what should they target? Siraj suggested the bridges they drove past, or major subway stations and train lines. In July 2004, Siraj introduced El-Davoudi to James El-Shafei, a portly 19-year-old who was a regular at the store. El-Shafei was also angry about the American treatment of Muslims and had even drawn a map of Staten Island bridges and police precincts to target, which Siraj shared with El-Davoudi. Soon the friends were discussing more feasible possibilities. Wall Street came up, but Siraj wasn't sure why it was so famous and asked El-Davoudi to explain. In August, Siraj had another idea. What about the Herald Square subway station in Midtown Manhattan? He transferred there on his commute between Brooklyn and Queens, and, eager to impress his companions, he mapped out the station. It was underneath a shopping mall. Maybe they could place bombs here. Then, before Siraj knew it, it was no longer idle talk. On August 21st, the three men visited Herald Square and made drawings that Eldavudi kept. But Siraj was starting to have doubts. The station was a busy one and never empty. What if a child got hurt? What if someone died because of him? Siraj liked to talk tough, but this was different. Eldavudi appeared to be serious. On the night of August 23rd, Siraj sat in the back seat of Eldavudi's tan Toyota Corolla, El-Shafee in the front. Eldavudi had said he had connected friends upstate, whom he called the Brothers, and now they were keen to support the Herald Square idea. Siraj was tense. He was determined to find a way out of the plot, but he was afraid. The Brothers sounded dangerous, and Eldavudi had come to know everything about him and his family, where they lived and worked. Siraj glanced at Eldavudi. Did he have a gun? Eldavudi handed a backpack to each of his companions, which were to be used to carry the bombs. Siraj looked at his backpack. "It's very big," he said. Eldavudi seemed perplexed. Siraj used to lift heavy bags of produce when he worked at a deli. "This is big?" Eldavudi asked. Siraj explained that it would be noticeable, then tried a different approach, telling an invented story about the FBI arresting 2 Muslims during a Pakistan Day parade near Herald Square. It would be too dangerous for him to be in the area now. Growing annoyed, Eldavudi reminded him that the Brothers were counting on him. Siraj hedged. He had already given the Brothers the idea, he said. He could help with the planning aspect, really anything but planting the bomb. But he needed to feel comfortable with every single detail. And there was another matter. I have to, ask my mom's permission. Exasperated, Eldavudi asked more directly about Siraj's willingness to place a bomb. You don't want to put it there? No. There was silence as the car rolled through Queens. Suddenly, El-Shafee said he would dress up as a Jew for the operation, and Siraj jokingly encouraged the idea, hoping laughter would cut the tension. Again, Eldavudi asked if Siraj would join. Siraj, now so close to home, responded that he could check out the security at the station. He clarified again, though, he wouldn't carry a bomb. He didn't want to put it anywhere with his hands. Eldavudi pulled up to Siraj's apartment building. They shook hands, but Siraj could sense Eldavudi's frustration and disappointment. I'm sorry, Siraj said, and got out. Siraj begged God for forgiveness for what he had almost become entangled in. He considered going to the police, but when there was a scuffle at the bookstore with an aggressive customer earlier that year, the New York Police Department charged him with misdemeanor assault, and that case was still open. He was a Muslim man with an asylum case pending in the wake of the September 11th attacks. He tried to reassure himself. Eldavudi had insisted that he was essential to the plot, and because Siraj had refused to place the bomb, didn't that really mean the plan was dead? They hadn't even finalized a date for an attack. 4 days after the car ride, Siraj got a call from the police department asking him to come to a station in Bay Ridge to discuss his misdemeanor charge. He set off from the bookstore around 3 p.m. when, without warning, he was surrounded by 3 unmarked cars. A gun was pointed at his head, and his hands were cuffed. An hour later, he was sitting in an office in Lower Manhattan, panicking. He asked to call his mom, but was not allowed to. A 6-foot table separated him and an NYPD officer an NYPD intelligence detective, an FBI agent, and 2 federal prosecutors. Siraj learned that he was under arrest on suspicion of conspiring to blow up the Herald Square subway station. His friend, Eldavudi, was an informant. That night, the department started carrying out another series of arrests, rounding up hundreds of demonstrators who had been gathering ahead of the Republican National Convention, scheduled to start in 3 days at Madison Square Garden, to protest the Bush administration's wars. Officers had been monitoring activist groups for weeks and justified the measures by invoking the specter of terrorism. As the arrests continued, the department focused the media's attention on the plot they had recently foiled just a block away from the convention at Herald Square. The police said they were forced to arrest Siraj and El-Shafei before they slipped surveillance and took action. It was clear that they had an intention to cause damage to kill people. Commissioner Raymond W. Kelly said in a news conference broadcast live on CNN. The motive, he stated, was hatred for America. When a reporter asked if there was any entrapment involved in the arrest, Kelly rejected the idea flatly. Entrapment? He replied. No, not that I see. This year brings the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. The wars the United States launched afterward have become forever wars, with American troops still active around the world. The detention center at Guantanamo Bay has become a political quagmire for every new administration. If the fight against terrorism has changed the way we engage with the world, it has also fundamentally altered our democracy at home. After the attacks, sweeping legislation and policy changes cleared the way for the authorities to surveil whole communities, monitoring even those who had no connection to terrorism. Prosecutors were now able to build cases from invasive intelligence-gathering tactics that would have been restricted earlier. The U.S. Attorney General allowed law enforcement to deploy informants from the earliest stages of a terrorism investigation, contravening the established practice of waiting until there was reasonable indication of criminal activity. The Justice Department further relaxed restrictions in later years, permitting such use of informants even when assessing a potential case. In trials, the government presented evidence gathered by paid civilian informants who latched onto low-income, vulnerable, and mentally challenged individuals, urged them toward a plot, and, in several cases, even offered money and supplies to carry out bombings. Nearly 50% of international terrorism-related prosecutions since 2001 have involved such informants, according to a database of cases maintained by Trevor Aronson and Margot Williams of The Intercept. The government also started exploiting a little-used statute that criminalized the provision of services or resources, so-called material support, to terrorist organizations, expanding the definition of support to target people with increasingly ambiguous connections to terrorists. In 2010, the Supreme Court even found that training militant groups on how to mediate conflicts peacefully constituted material support. Since the September 11th attacks, the government has imprisoned some 800 people on charges related to international terrorism, according to the Intercept database. But these numbers obscure a complicated reality. Many of these people were not found to have committed any acts of violence. Still, the government managed to achieve a high rate of conviction. Those accused of terrorism often pleaded guilty, usually because they were offered leniency in exchange for information, or because they knew they would almost certainly receive a longer sentence if they went to trial and were convicted. And if the evidence suggesting terrorism was too weak, prosecutors sometimes ended up indicting suspects on other offenses involving fraud, immigration, drug possession, or perjury. in what the National Security Division, a branch of the Justice Department, called Category 2 cases, and adding them to the list of victories in the fight against terrorism. For example, Sabri Benkala, who was investigated on suspicion of being part of a network of terrorists in Virginia, was acquitted of the original charges in 2004, but ultimately convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice. Prosecuting terror-related targets using Category 2 offenses, an NSD report stated, is often an effective method, and sometimes the only available method, of deterring and disrupting potential terrorist planning and support activities. In the years after the September 11th attacks, government officials pointed to the absence of a major attack as evidence of the success of counterterrorism strategies. But in some respects, the government's counterterrorism policy may be manufacturing the very threat it was meant to confront. You're trying to get people before they commit a crime, said David Cole, the National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. And if you're doing that, you're going to end up locking up a lot of people who probably would have never ended up committing a real crime. Who knows whether any of these people would have engaged in a terrorist act? I don't know. You don't know. The courts don't know. The government doesn't know. But as a result, the courts tend to be very deferential because they buy into the notion better safe than sorry. As a growing number of Muslims went to prison on terrorism-related charges, the arrests themselves became evidence of a larger threat. Siraj was not affiliated with any terrorist group, but for government agencies and the news media, his case was proof of the need for greater vigilance. Experts pointed to Siraj in studies about radicalization. In 2007, 2 NYPD intelligence analysts prepared a report for policymakers and law enforcement, detailing how the Islamic bookstore in Bay Ridge became an extremist incubator for Siraj and El-Shafei as they progressed through the stages of radicalization. Speaking at a congressional hearing in New York in 2008, Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg said the Herald Square bombing plot proved that the NYPD's intelligence and counterterrorism bureaus were crucial elements in the global fight against terrorism. Today, there has been little accounting from policymakers of whether these measures have made us any safer. Instead, the rise in domestic terrorism incidents is inciting calls to further broaden the government's counterterrorism apparatus. In 2017, the Government Accountability Office reported the number of violent extremist attacks on American soil that resulted in death. From September 12, 2001 to the end of 2016, 23 such attacks were carried out by radical Islamist violent extremists. 62 were carried out by far right-wing violent extremist groups. For the past several years, the FBI has stated that it is concerned about domestic extremist movements driven by perceptions of government or law enforcement overreach, socio-political conditions, and reactions to legislative actions. In 2019, the FBI Agents Association, which represents 14,000 current and former agents, urged Congress to apply the weight of the federal government to meet the threat. The call was revived after Donald Trump's supporters stormed the Capitol in January. The Biden administration directed the intelligence community to conduct a domestic threat assessment and instructed the National Security Council to prioritize the issue.
So you've got these like fake stash house situations where essentially an ATF informant has created a robbery of a stash house. Now, in that instance, they're focused in on the idea that these guys were already out committing violent robberies. But, it really doesn't end there. The federal government has a history of setting up people they think will do other things. And the Newberg Sting is a documentary that you can find. I think it's on HBO Max. That's one of the big things, big incidents that come to my mind when you've got the FBI on behest of the federal government, because the ATF and the FBI are not the same thing, obviously, but they are intertwined, being arms of the federal government's law enforcement branch. So the Newburgh, New York they call it the 2009 Bronx terrorism plot. In this instance, there are 4 men that are engaged in a terrorism plot. But when you start to unravel the plot, on May 20th of 2009, U.S. law enforcement arrested 4 men in connection with a plot to allegedly shoot down military airplanes flying out of an Air National Guard base in Newburgh, New York. And they also charged them with conspiracy to blow up 2 synagogues in the Riverdale community of the Bronx, New York. All of the weapons and all of the information supplied in these cases came from the FBI. These guys that get convicted are LaGuerre Payen, David Williams, Onta Williams, and James Cremiti. These guys are all doing serious federal prison time. They will not see the light of day until after 2030. Now, it's all led by a Pakistani guy named Shahid Hussain. He was a criminal, but the FBI had him on DMV fraud charges, basically fraud charges related to driver's licenses.
Like fake IDs?
Fake IDs. And he never gets charged in the Newburgh sting or the 2009 Bronx plot. But this is an example where the FBI used lots of money and other incentives to lure these people into a situation where essentially they get talked into doing something they probably normally wouldn't have done. And when we get into these situations, I always I have questions of law enforcement. In general, I question state and local law enforcement all the time. The FBI in recent years has done some sketchy stuff. So here's the outline of what these guys were charged with in this situation and what resulted in the convictions. And by the way, this is all on audio and video. So that's what makes it even weirder. In 2008, Hussain is working off a deal that's over 6 years old where he was arrested post 9/11 in this scam involving driver's license. So 6 years later, he is still working this off. He shows up at a mosque under the name Maqsood. He starts talking extremism. He starts talking jihad. He starts talking violence. And most of the congregation for this mosque, most of the congregants believed right away that Shahid Hussain was an informant. So no one reported his jihad nonsense to anyone in the authorities. His tactics in 2008 of showing up at this mosque and talking about violence and rhetoric flushes out Cremiti. And Cremiti, sort of he's taken into Hussain's confidence. And he's talking about going back to Afghanistan and becoming a martyr. And essentially, the way that he's talking about doing that is by taking out U.S. soldiers. They are talked into, in 2009, about a year later, a plot where they can do that without going overseas. They can bomb the Riverdale Temple and the Riverdale Jewish Center in the Bronx, and then using pilfered Stinger missiles, this is surface-to-air guided missiles, they can shoot down military planes that are flying out of a nearby airbase. So these 4 geniuses, they buy drop phones and they buy cameras from a local Walmart and they start scouting out the synagogues. They try to buy guns up in Newburgh, New York. However, the dealer says he's sold out. Whether he's really sold out, who knows? They then drive downstate and they meet with a gang leader in Brooklyn and they buy a pistol. All of this is being recorded by Hussein. Hussein is like taking very careful notes and documenting everything that Cremiti and the Williams kids are doing and paying. So on May 6, 2009, they traveled to Stamford, Connecticut. But on the way there, one of the men realizes that it seems like they're being followed. They actually go back to Newburgh to try and lose their tail. And when they're satisfied they're no longer being followed, they head back and they make their pickup. And they pick up what they believe is a Stinger surface-to-air guided missile system and 3 what appear to be homemade improvised explosive devices. All of these are inert, by the way. None of them work. So they return back to Newburgh with their bounty, and they're satisfied that they're safe and they haven't been caught. Then they start conducting surveillance of military planes at the Air National Guard base at Newburgh. They're taking photographs and they're making plans to shoot down an airplane because that's what normal people do. All of this equipment has been provided by the FBI. All of the funds to do all of this have been provided by the FBI through a Pakistani immigrant named Hussein. The men placed these fake bombs wired up to cell phones in 3 separate cars outside of the Riverdale Temple and near the Riverdale Jewish Center, which are all in the Bronx. One of the suspects actually placed the explosives. The other 3 suspects are serving as lookouts. So the men return to the vehicle and they're heading to go up to Stewart Air National Guard base to attack the base with their fake Stinger missiles when they get stopped by law enforcement. As the men are returning to the vehicle, it becomes clear that their arrest is also a plot. There's an 18-wheel, like a big truck, marked as property of the New York City Police Department that blocks them in on this street. Hussein is the driver of the suspect's vehicle. So the 5 of them, they all get arrested together. And they get drug out, handcuffed. Nobody resists arrest. And they start to understand that everything they've just done is not real. So they find out that the car bombs, the improvised explosive devices that had been sold to them, and the missiles that had been sold to them are all fake. In fact, the pictures of the bombs show them, they're actually just like 40 pounds each of clay, like modeling clay. It looks like C4, but like it doesn't do anything. So Cremiti and Anta and David Williams and Pan, they're charged with conspiracy and weapons offenses at the first court appearance on May 21st of 2009. They're all held without bail. The charges that they're faced with at that time are conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction in the United States and conspiracy to acquire and use anti-aircraft missiles. Every charge individually carries a maximum sentence of life in prison. They all plead not guilty. In March of 2010, there is a motion to dismiss filed on the grounds of entrapment, and it should have succeeded. It didn't, but the defense argued that the plot was proposed and closely directed by Hussein and the FBI, who suggested Hussein suggested the targets. He bought the defendant's groceries. He purchased the gun. He arranged for the fake bombs and the fake missile. And he assembled the explosive devices. And he drove them to where they were supposed to leave the explosive devices. In late 2010, Hussein testifies. And he says that Cremiti hated Jews and Jewish people, and he hated American people, and he hated American soldiers. He said that he would kill the president. So this is not going over well with Hussein testifying that Cremiti had said all of these things. After a 6-week trial, the 4 men are all convicted. The lawyers for the 4, they filed a motion for a new trial claiming that Hussein committed perjury during the trial and that the discovery provided by the government proved it. David Williams actually goes on the record in an interview with the Village Voice and says that they were not part of the plot to hurt people. Their understanding was that they would be transporting money, and they had planned to rip off Hussein because they believed Hussein was a government informant. The incriminating statements
that make that better somehow?
No, but my point is it's all crazy. So his statements to the Village Voice were that, yes, they said those things, but they said those things to convince Hussein that they would make credible terrorists in order to have access to the money involved, because their assumption was that these bombs and the Stinger missile cost money and they were going to rip them off.
And that's why you have the right to remain silent.
Well, he doesn't testify in court. He does this in an interview. And actually, I absolutely believe him.
Oh, yeah. But it just isn't like, that doesn't make me think higher of him.
No, but okay, thinking higher of them or not, I agree with you.
Let me take that back. It doesn't make me think less criminal of him.
Okay, but do you think terrorists that needs life in prison?
Well, I wanted to ask you something. You said that they placed the bombs in 3 vehicles?
They placed the bombs in vehicles at Riverdale, yes.
With and they were anticipating blowing them up.
Right. They were driven there by Hussein. And he picked out vehicles and said, that's where you need to put the bombs in order for us to get the maximum amount of damage. So they did one person placed the bombs.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, they did that.
And they had absolutely no idea that the bombs would not blow up.
They did not. But they also... But they didn't make the bombs. They didn't assemble the bombs. All they did was take the bombs over and put them underneath cars.
All right. Well, let's say that they were real bombs and they blew up. Like, would they be guilty then?
Yes. If the bombs were real and they blew up, yes.
Okay. And just because they happen to not be real...
That's not my argument. My argument is not that they happen to not be real. My argument is that the FBI provided the bombs.
Well, that's really the only thing that caught my attention as far as possible culpability. I do not think I would have to know a whole lot more about what was going on, but I do not think that would be a life sentence. No.
It ended up not being a life sentence. And you know who agrees with you on that is the federal judge in charge of this case. Her name was Colleen McMahon. She criticized not only the defendants for having gotten involved in this, but she also criticized the government's overzealous handling of the investigation. In reference to Crimity, she said the essence of what occurred here is a government understandably zealous to protect its citizens from terrorism, coming upon a man both bigoted and suggestible, one who was incapable of committing an act of terrorism on his own. So it created acts of terrorism out of his fantasies of bravado and bigotry, and then made those fantasies come true to some degree. She added that the government did not have to infiltrate and foil some nefarious plot. There was no nefarious plot to foil, so they created one.
Right. And so, yeah, what do you think about that?
I wondered what the people, the 4 guys, I wondered what they thought. And they did have some things to say. Like, Crimity's take on it was that he was sorry. He was never a terrorist, and he was never going to be a terrorist. But in his statement, he apologized. They all apologized at sentencing. But Crimity, I think, said the best part of it. When the judge said that if the defendants were not zealots, they were not political or religious martyrs, they were purely thugs for hire. And what Crimity's response was that he was very sorry that he let himself get caught up in a sting like this. And I would be too.
I'm very sorry I let myself get caught up in a sting like this.
Correct.
Well, I mean, there's actually nothing untrue about what he said.
So they sentenced Committee, and then they sentenced Williams. Then they came back and sentenced Pan, and they all got basically 25 years in prison. And the judge repeated her criticisms in every sentencing of these guys. In 2013, a federal appeals court, by a vote of 2-1, upheld the convictions that the 3 defendants were guilty as charged. Judge Newman rejected the misconduct claim, stating that with all sting operations, government creation of the opportunity to commit an offense, even to the point of supplying defendants with materials essential in committing crimes, does not exceed due process limits. The agents would have been derelict in their duties if they did not test how far a committee would go to carry out its desires. When a government agent encounters a Muslim who volunteers that he wants to do something to America or die like a martyr, the agent is entitled to probe the attitudes of that person to learn whether his religious views have impelled him toward the violent brand of radical Islam that poses a dire threat to the United States. Honestly, I understand what she's saying there. I think the police, including the FBI in our country, are too stupid to be given that much rope.
Well, I was going to say, like, what happens is 9/11 in 2001 was a huge deal, the biggest, act of domestic terrorism since Pearl Harbor. And it created all these like super stringent rules and acts of non-terrorism and anti-terrorism and all these people with special terrorism training. And at the end of the day, there's not enough terrorists to support all of these people who have been trained to fight terrorism.
Correct.
And so they might as well be like playwrights or screenwriters, because they literally are writing their own story that they then like make happen and turn around and they bust the people for being terrorists. I think that we should all very carefully consider and the judge saying the probe of the potential terrorist. I don't think we really want to go down that path, because if the theory is law enforcement can use the unlimited resources of the government to fuel someone's like worst fantasy. This happened to be a terrorism situation, but that's not reality. That is, I'm surprised to hear like a judge say something like that, because we never want to be charging, trying, and convicting people on what they could potentially do.
And that's all for Unrelated this week. Next week, we'll touch on an interesting topic: how does human trafficking relate to organized crime? And do you happen to know how many children under the age of 18 are missing in Arkansas right now? You're never going to believe the number. Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LabrottieCreations.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun pop pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And we'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
Dulcina Parra is a reporter in Mexico, one of the most dangerous countries for journalists in the world. She's one of the few reporters left in Los Mochis, in the state of Sinaloa, where El Chapo's drug cartel reigns supreme. Death threats are part of her daily life.
They can kill you anytime, whether you have a bodyguard or not.
But Parra refuses to be intimidated and continues her work undaunted. Dulcina Parra is on the way to a remote district away from Los Mochis. She has a meeting with women who've been searching for their missing children for years. Now it's become a search for bodies.
There are so many. We're going to get them all. It's full. Seriously? I think we'll stay here tonight.
3 skeletons.
And apparently a big grave. Oh, the stench. Is this a body?
This one is decomposing still. It hasn't been long. It's about to burst.
Really? I'm going to broadcast this live. Hello, we're in Juan Jose Rios with the searchers of El Fuerte. They've been here since sunrise. They were told there might be some secret graves here. They've discovered one. These women's loved ones have disappeared. Here we can see the bones. There are bones here.
The women have already dug up several graves.
4 bodies. One is still decomposing. The others are skeletons.
It looks like a secret graveyard, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Subina is leading the group. Some of these women have been looking for their sons for years. Many were killed by members of the Sinaloa drug cartel and buried in unknown places. Over half of those who have disappeared, the desaparecidos, are thought to have been connected to the drug scene. Dulcina says that this is often the case because of the poor job prospects in the region. Mirna and the others often dig into the areas controlled by the drug cartel and so make them their enemies.
They told us we should stop searching, otherwise the same will happen to us. One day someone will find us in a grave.
Just to feel a little safer, Mirna has now a personal bodyguard, an ex-soldier, who is armed and never takes his eyes off her. The search continues.
This is a body part that we found in one of the graves. There is the ulna, the radius, and the hand.
Individual body parts, bones with skin, and clothing remnants come to light. The smell of decay is almost unbearable for the journalists. And for the mothers, what's unbearable is the uncertainty. Is this their child this time?
I'm glad, and yet at the same time, I'm sad because I don't know if it's my son or hers. In the end, it doesn't matter whose son it is. We're searching for them because we love them. It feels like my heart is going to jump out. My body is shaking. My ears are shut.
Will you carry on?
I'm not going anywhere. If it's possible to stay here, I will.
Are you scared?
No, I'm not scared. They've already done their worst. What can they do to me now? You're a good friend. I want to find him finally. I'm waiting and waiting. Every day I wait.
Hours later, the municipal police has turned up, and yet Dulcina says that corrupt police officers are involved in the abductions ordered by the cartel. The police do not deny this.
If one of us is bent, that's his problem. But we are not bent.
There are officially over 40,000 people missing in Mexico, but there are probably more. Mirna and the other mothers have found almost 500 of them dead. 9 on this day alone, and the police finds even more. Some have been dead, not even for 2 weeks. There's still also a lot left for Josina to do. Josina takes a different route to work every day, just one of her many safety precautions.
If I go to work like somewhere that somebody was killed, I try to go with a colleague from a different medium to protect myself.
Nova Radio is just one of the broadcasters that Josina works for. She has known Javier Mercado for a long time. As journalists here in the state of Sinaloa, they are also sufferers.
Is there freedom of speech here?
A form of, 30% perhaps. That's the state of our country. Before they used to say don't cross the drug cartels, the military or the church.
Now don't cross the politicians.
Now don't cross the politicians because they're the thieves and the police at the same time.
Ladies and gentlemen,
today our program's ratings will go up. Today our guest is the woman who knows most about the security situation in Sinaloa, or rather the lack of it.
Yes, I think so too.
Hello, thank you for listening.
And we'll start off with the big story of the week.
Let me tell you that over the weekend, Juan José Rios was transformed into a gigantic graveyard. 15 bodies were found.
The bodies were brought to the morgue in Los Mochis for all those who have missing loved ones.
Josina follows up on the searching mothers regularly, despite the fact that she has received many open threats.
I remember once there was a funeral wreath with my name on it in front of my door. You don't forget something like that. It was a form of intimidation, as if to say, you find bodies, you find dead people, here you are, your funeral wreath.
The threat almost became reality about 10 years ago. Cartel members accused her of spying for another cartel or working for the government. So the cartel abducted her.
My life was in danger. I knew they'd either kill me or let me go, but I had already seen all the faces. So I thought they would kill me. One of them said it was time and made this gesture. Another one asked me if I had a last wish. I said, God bless you. You're turning my daughters into orphans. Let God light your path and let you be well. He looked at me and said, nobody had ever said anything like that to him. He told me they usually say, let me go and I'll give you money, cars, land. At that moment, he put his hand on me, on my leg, and said, you're not going today. She's okay, boss.
This is the road where they let her go. Look straight ahead, they told her. Look back once, and you're dead.
I walked straight on. I prayed to God for my daughters and my family. In that moment, I realized I was doing the only thing. The only thing possible in Sinaloa. We have to fight for freedom of speech so that there is no corruption, no impunity. But it's hard. You always live with the risk. If you're on the cartel's list, they can kill you at any time, with or without a bodyguard.
She only really understood how close it had been when a colleague of hers was kidnapped just a few days later. She knew him and had researched the drug scene with him as well. 2 weeks later, his body was found in black plastic bags.
Hello, it's me.
How are you?
Very well.
Dulcina often visits her sister Laura, who looks after her youngest daughter Joseline, when Dulcina has a long day.
She's always been very committed to her work from the start. What was it like for me? Like her children's mother. She's missed many important moments in her daughters' lives.
I'm sad that she's not here most of the time.
I'm sad because I know that something can happen to her. Because I know that she's not safe when she's working. She's always very strong. She doesn't always show her feelings so that we don't feel burdened. And I think that what she's doing is very good.
I know they're always worried about me, but it's moving to hear it.
I think her mother is an example for her. What has to be done has to be done. 100% and a bit extra on top. She's always given 100% and 100% extra.